Hello and welcome to this special event, the State of Women-Owned Businesses, examining key findings of the 2024 Biz2Credit Annual Report. Today's webcast is presented by Biz2Credit. The program will begin promptly at 2 p.m. A recording of today's webcast will be made available in the Biz2Credit Webcast Center following the conclusion of the session. Once again, welcome to this special event, the State of Women-Owned Businesses, examining key findings of the 2024 Biz2Credit Annual Report. Before we begin, please note that this webcast and all answers provided by the participants are meant solely for informational purposes and are not to be considered substitutes for legal or tax advice. Qualifying for business loans or any government-backed lending programs is not guaranteed and is at the sole discretion of the lender in conjunction with SBA or other governmental agency guidelines as applicable. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of Biz2Credit, its affiliates, or partner companies featured in this webcast. We will begin by looking at our agenda and then introduce our host and guests for this afternoon's presentation. The webcast will last approximately 45 minutes, and we will cover several important agenda points. We will hear from our special guests, Corinne Goble, CEO of the AWBC, the Association of Women's Business Centers, and the work they do in supporting small businesses. We will hear from Biz2Credit's Chief People Officer, Debbie Kemp, about the most recent study that Biz2Credit has published on women-owned businesses. And we will have Nikki Ware, a small business owner, give her perspective on the findings. We will now welcome Biz2Credit's Chief People Officer, Debbie Kemp, who will introduce our guests for this special event. Debbie, thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Welcome. We're joined today by Corinne Goble, the CEO of the Association of Women Business Centers, to hear about the way they work and the work that they do to support women-owned small businesses across the country. Corinne, we're excited to have you join us and was wondering if you could just start by telling us about how the AWBC helps women-owned businesses.
Absolutely. So glad to be here and to be with you and in your colors too. So feels like I'm in the right place. Yeah, the Association of Women's Business Centers is committed to being our nation's premier organization. We want to provide standards, resources, and tools that women need to be economic hubs of power in their communities, obviously supporting their businesses. And we do that by supporting and sustaining a national network of women's business centers. The number is always growing. Right now, we're somewhere between 136 and 140, but we'll be growing substantially. So we provide introductions and we connect women-owned businesses to those women's business centers. And the best way to find them, and I'll talk about it a ton, is through our Hope to Women portal, which is HOPE, H-O-P-E, stands for Helping Others by Promoting Entrepreneurship. The number 2, women.org. So hopetowomen.org. And if you do a request assistance form there, we learn a little bit about you, and then we make a personal introduction to a women's business center. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about what they do, but in essence, they help any stage business, whether it's just getting started or helping a business grow. And they do it through education, access to resources, as well as helping them find capital or credit.
That's great. So you touched on resources. What types of resources do you provide?
Well, it's really dependent on what the business needs. And that's why we take in that information on the front end. So that's can feel a little bit like, I don't even know Hope to Women. Why am I having to enter information about my business? That helps us learn about you. And then we can offer businesses that are or resources, tools, training, assessments, connections. It just depends on exactly what the business needs. Usually when a business comes to us, what they say they need is money. And what we find when we get to know them a little bit, though, sometimes it's not like dollars. Sometimes what they need is customers, or sometimes they probably need a little bit of product development or some help with marketing. So we get to know the business. We don't just take the word for it and say, you need money? Well, let's find you some money. We say, well, what do you think you need? And then let's learn a little bit about you. We'll tell you what we think you need, and then some steps that we think you can take that will help get you there.
That's great. So if I'm a small, like I'm a first-time business owner and I'm coming to you, can you just walk me through the process? I think you started with that information sheet. Then what?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, like, the hazards are, if you don't get the right expertise, you're liable to make a mistake. And most business owners are quick to tell you they've made a lot of mistakes. And so we want to catch you before you make them. And the only way we can do that is if you bring us in as early as possible. Like, do the the intake form, come see us, come talk to us and meet us even before you start the business, before you register your business with the state, before you get that business license. And we'll just kind of talk you through the advantages and disadvantages of different entity types. So that's sort of one kind of assistance. Another is, let's evaluate the business plan, or in some cases, you might not have a business plan at all. And so we're going to walk you through what's the easiest approach for you to get a business plan. Some people are really daunted, like they think of a business plan as like a gigantic Word document essay type with charts and graphs and financial projections. That can be overwhelming. But we have some other tools that kind of gamify the experience, so we can help kind of like get those thoughts on paper. So business planning, marketing plan, it might be you're up and running, might be you've been in business for 5 years. In fact, we talk to a lot of businesses who are saying, like, we're doing great, but we've leveled off with our revenue. Maybe we're at 5 figures, 6 figures, and we just think we could do more. And then we'll talk to them. In many cases, it's that these businesses have bootstrapped. In other words, they've self-financed. They're really proud of it. And perhaps if they tapped into some credit or some equity capital, perhaps then that's going to help them take their business to the next level. But we can talk through what their options are and then even prepare them before they ever go apply.
That's great. So again, it just sounds like different stages, their needs might be different. You're able to, pop in there and help them through that next stage, which in some cases is fun. Right? That's great. Thank you so much. I thought it'd be great to now just hop into our study that we also want to cover. And, we release this study on International Women's Day every year to kind of spotlight the state of women-owned businesses. And we take in, as you know, thousands, tens of thousands of applications from small to mid-sized businesses across the country. And the results offer trusted, insights into the performance of women-owned companies. So together, let's go through those findings. So the first slide that we thought we'd talk about is the average annual revenues from women-owned businesses. And it looks like they increased 15.5% in 2023, and it was a little bit over $250,000. And it paints a positive picture for women-owned businesses. What are your thoughts on the growth of women-owned companies?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for doing this data dive. Like, thank you for collecting the data, for sharing the data back, and then let's, get into it and really let's find out what it means for women-owned businesses. What good is it, if we're measuring the data and if we're not managing something to improve it? So, really appreciate the opportunity to dive into it. When it comes to the increase in revenue, like, that's really important. We know that along the same lines with the economy, we probably saw some increases in costs as well. And so while I see this increase of revenue of, this 15.5% year over year, I just want to temper a little bit the celebration and say, we know that we also experience some inflation. So I would love to see more women take opportunities to increase that revenue more. And for the biggest thing, like, we're combating at Women's Business Centers on the revenue piece, is the confidence in their pricing. And that's just a mindset issue. Like for women to just shed the guilt with charging market rate prices. And so that's one thing that we like to deal with the women's business centers. And I think if we can tackle that, maybe we'll see this revenue number grow more.
Yeah, and you know, it was interesting to see that the revenues of women-owned companies were still so much smaller than men-owned organizations, because their revenue is still sitting quite a bit, I think of it quite a bit higher at $690,000 versus the women at $452,000. Do you have any thoughts about the 34% gap between the two?
Well, we definitely see that the revenue number, the gap is there, but it's also, it tells the story, if you look a little bit different about the profile of the business, that men, or I should say mainstream businesses, generally have a higher number of employees as well. And so it's interesting, and I'm not sure if we're going to get into it today, but revenue doesn't always tell the whole story. We know that despite the fact that women-owned businesses actually have lower revenue numbers, potentially their ability to make a bigger profit on the number, at least as a percentage of the gross revenue, can be a little bit greater. So, there's like good news even in some of this tougher news to see.
Yeah. Well, on the top, just between the two, again, if you're looking, a couple more slides we want to get through. The next one is the average earnings of women-owned businesses, and you spoke to this just a bit ago, and I think it's great to again highlight is that the average earning for women business is still around $88,000 in 2023, which was similar to what we found in 22, but the operating expenses has increased by 20, and so that I think that eats away at those profits. And I'm sure your directors or the directors of the WBC hear from many business owners about the higher expenses, and again, probably due to higher inflation. Can you break this down for us?
Shoot. I mean, it's so many different things. It's the supply chain pressures, it's increases in the cost of goods. And then when you're considering services, you're looking at the overhead and whatnot. I hope what's also represented here is, and we don't really know until we break it down, I hope women are paying themselves first. Like we do a lot of financial education classes, and women tend to pay themselves last. And we're really advocating that they pay themselves first. Maybe they're getting the message. I don't know. I'm hoping that there's something optimistic inside the data.
That's really important, because again, I can see where they might not, right? They're worried about paying these other expenses and just kind of taking it by the side for themselves. Next, let's look at the top industries for women-owned businesses. At the top is services. With the exception of public, administration, it's the largest industry represented by women-owned companies at a little over 18, I guess 0.4%, followed by the trade, retail trade, and then we've got healthcare and social assistance at almost 12%, and then accommodation and food service a little bit lower, and then followed up by professional and scientific technical services. What do you make of that breakdown? And I guess in addition to that is, what do you think might be the difference in what, again, when we think about the revenue for men and their businesses against the women, are the differences really in the industries where women-owned businesses are providing services and business?
Yeah, well, I mean, we know the American economy is really services strong. The American economy really does dominate in that sector. So it's kind of no surprise that women would be situated there as well. I mean, you think of consulting businesses and I mean, women, we sort of like we're at each other's service. We're at the service of the economy. So I'm not going to say this is a bad thing. And the retail trade and healthcare also, it's like a natural fit because women know these sectors. We are the consumers, we're the buyers of the household. So like it makes sense that we're going to gravitate to these areas where where we're strong, and also you consider our role in our care economy. Makes sense. And I certainly wouldn't steer women away from something that they're really comfortable in. But we are seeing growth in other sectors that have been traditionally male dominated. And I think this chart just isn't able to show that. But, like manufacturing sectors, these STEM sectors, women are really starting to take notice. And all you have to do is walk into an engineering classroom, and you can see a much different picture than you did, 5 or even 10 years ago.
Well, that's great, and we may see that change, right, in this next year's, findings as well, because it'll probably start taking effect a little bit more. Actually, I just want to hop to to our last slide because I think it's also very interesting, and that is looking at the average funding. The funding acceptance rate for women-owned businesses this year was 35%, and it's the average funding percentage, sorry, I just want to make, was 35%. The average size was close to $53,000. That is an increase from what we saw last year in the study. And it reflects, I think, that businesses can generally expect to qualify for about 10 to 15% of their annual revenue in funding amounts. What's the advice that you and the WBC directors generally give their clients when it comes to funding?
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing here is the other side of another piece of data that you're not going to be able to share today that I just learned today, which is that 14% of businesses that say they need funding aren't even applying. Where I think so I think the average acceptance rate that's increasing though is a result of more people actually going out for the funding that need it and can demonstrate that they need it and can demonstrate their credit worthiness. What's important about that is for a health of a business, you've got to have at least a commercial line of credit. You've got to have access to commercial financing and not be relying on the personal financing. I do think that we're seeing like a trend where women-owned businesses are getting savvier, ditching the personal credit cards for their business expenses and opting toward, business financing for a variety of business purposes.
Yeah, that makes all the sense. I just, it is challenging. And again, when I think about being a small business owner and starting out, it was easy to just go for the cards first, and then realize that, it's time to, to really, if we're going to run this as a business, we need to get that. We just need business financing. It really.
You know what? And if I have time to just share one other thing, we learned, which is that during COVID, many women didn't have a great relationship with a banker, women-owned business. They learned that lesson from PPP, or they've built the relationship, back then on the backs of COVID, and now they've got the relationship. With the relationship intact, now they've got access, and when they're asking for credit, they know how to ask for it, they know how to apply, and then they know how to secure it.
That's great to hear. Just again, for women who are even thinking about starting a business, how to go about it. Very helpful. Corinne, thank you very much for helping me take us through the State of Women-Owned Business Study. And thank you for describing the vital work that AWBC does to support women-owned small businesses. And now we'll turn to Nikki Ware, who is in Yorba Linda, California, and is a small business owner herself. She's the owner of Nikki's Kitchen, the realization of a lifelong dream of running her own restaurant. It's a comfy local place where the community can congregate for a quick bite to eat, a cup of coffee, or a baked treat. Nikki, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes. Tell us a little bit more about your business. What inspired you to start it?
Probably my biggest inspiration was my dad. My mom was not a cook, so I learned from my dad. And I'd always wanted to do something with cooking, but I never really did it until later in life. I'd always done catering for family and friends. I love the idea of, putting together a meal and sharing that and coming together with family and friends. So that was always a big inspiration. I'd been in the business world. I kind of started working right out of high school and got into the construction industry. And then my husband and I eventually opened a construction company in 1991. So I still own 50% of that. And we've been doing that for a long time. But about 10, 12 years ago, I just knew I needed something else and I wanted to have something of my own. My daughter, who at the time was 10 or 11, kind of looked up to me and, I was always talking about this business, and she was like, Mom, I don't think you're ever going to do it. And I had another friend who was like, if you're going to do it, go for it. And so I think between the two of them, I just thought, okay, this is what I want to do. I had a little derailment because I did end up getting pregnant when I was 40, which was quite the surprise. So I have a almost 26-year-old and an almost 13-year-old right now. But everything kind of fell into place a couple years later. And when he was getting ready to go to first grade, I did think, I'm not getting any younger. And if this is what I really want to do, I need to go for it. And that's what we did.
That's very exciting. And it's nice to have something of your own as well, right? Any challenges that you've experienced? I mean, you named maybe one that could be a challenge, but I mean, anything else along the way as a small business owner?
I think, thankfully, things that I was unsure of, the food industry, I wasn't sure of, figuring out labor costs and food costs. I knew the build out, like that really wasn't an issue because I had the construction knowledge and my husband's help. I looked to a couple different restaurant owners in the area who were great mentors to me, both owning small businesses, and they gave me some great insight. I even worked at a friend's pizza place for a couple months to think, like, I wanted to see, is this really what I want to do? Baking for family and friends is one thing. Dealing with customers on a day-to-day basis was a completely different, ball game. So those are some of the things that I was like, okay, I'll figure out as I go. But even the other day, I was thinking, we had a large soda company that wouldn't even deal with me when I was opening because I couldn't really tell them how busy I was going to be. And that was something where I thought, well, how am I supposed to figure this out? So, and then I think here we are, almost 6 years later, thankfully another soda company went with me and we were able to, open up.
That's great. Have you ever used any funding in the past or worked with any organization that provided funding?
We haven't, and it's something that I didn't even think about to look for. Thankfully we had good equity in our home, and that's what, and some backing from our construction company that I was able to do that. We definitely got some grants during COVID because that was obviously a big challenge. We had been open a full year and we were just getting our, feet wet and everything. And I was looking at the numbers and I thought, okay, now we can look at last year's sales and really figure out what 2020 is going to look like. Well, and then 2020 was the pandemic.
Right.
So then that was kind of like, okay, what do we do? So we got some great grants from a couple different companies, and that really helped push us through. One of them was from the California Restaurant Association, and the nice thing about that was we were able to focus on rewarding our employees who stuck with us during COVID, so that was huge. And now it's kind of like for expansion or other things, it's looking like, okay, that was one of the things I thought about, is like, where do I even go to look for funding, especially for a woman-owned business? And that's something I've never really looked at.
Well, we can give you some insights there at some point as well.
Yeah,
no, it's great. One thing that I thought it'd be great is to turn to some of the insights from our annual study on, from women-owned businesses. And as, an owner yourself, I'm curious to get your perspectives. One of the items was we saw the average revenue increase in women-owned businesses from 22 to 23. And what are your thoughts on that? Did you happen to experience that as well?
We did have some increase. I think part of it, and I tend not to get into the movements of, women-owned businesses. I'm about supporting small businesses in general. I love the idea, though, that has, I think, really pushed, because there's a lot of business owners that I love supporting, and they happen to be women-owned businesses. So I think part of it came from that movement of, not tearing other women down, supporting women, trying to see everybody do well. And I think that was big the last year. So I think that definitely helped.
Do you think there was any movement in the industry? Because that was the other piece of it. Retail industry saw a bit of an increase more than some others.
Yes, and I think, well, especially coming out of the, pandemic, I think everybody was all about supporting small business because they saw how everybody was struggling. Restaurants, I think, a lot of people obviously were home, eating at home. And so I think when people were ready to get out, they were ready to get out.
I think you're right. We were. Another interesting finding was while the average, of those earnings increased, we saw the operating expenses also increase. And here it was by about 20%. Is there any particular area that you found might be challenging as well within your industry from an operating expense perspective?
Probably two. Definitely the continual increase in minimum wage has been tough, because it's been tough in the aspect that we are, we're trying to pay our key employees a little bit more money, but then as every employee, even a brand new person who hasn't even worked for us 90 days gets to be bumped up, it's then the struggle of, do you bump everybody up? So we've had that. And food costs. I mean, everybody saw it in the pandemic, coming out of it. One of the things that I learned, but it takes my time, I'm kind of freed up to go to Restaurant Depot to get my, eggs, sugar, butter, that kind of thing. I was using a lot at the beginning, the convenience of my food vendors, which was great. But even now I'm seeing, if I make the trip to Restaurant Depot, I'm paying $20 to $30 less a case sometimes for eggs, for bacon. And so it's me going to Restaurant Depot 2 to 3 times a week. But I found it's a huge savings too.
So interesting. We also saw in the study that California was the second highest state for businesses applying for financing. We sometimes hear that California isn't the friendliest state to do business. What has been your experience? I mean, I know you just mentioned being able to get a grant from the Restaurant Association. So again, it's just tying that back in. How have you found that as a small business owner?
It is, and the grants, I think for small business, they really tried to help us through the pandemic and out of it. But it's a tough state to do business in. And I think in our industry, especially as a small business owner, I'm not getting the business credits that, even on product that other chains are getting. So I have to struggle to say, okay, I'll ring people up at the restaurant, take people's orders. And sometimes I feel like I don't even want to say the total of the order because I'm thinking, I can't believe these people are paying this much to eat out. But I mean, we all see it going to, local, even fast food. I said, you see the increases that are there. And it's just that fine balance of trying to charge enough money to be able to pay your taxes and be able to pay any, the employee, like I said, the minimum wages, but still make a profit for yourself, but trying to, stay in business it's tough. And I think, my perk is probably that I'm in Orange County. We're in an area that's very supportive of business and trying to help promote business. I rely a lot on the chamber. One of the things I've struggled with, though, that now I'm starting to focus probably in the last year, why I kind of look to the Restaurant Association, is I had my, nose to the ground, just working. And now I'm kind of getting my head above water and saying like, okay, I need to pay attention to some of the things that are going on in the state so that I can see how it's affecting my business.
So insightful. I really appreciate your time. It's It's also great to hear your story and get your perspective on the trends and findings as a small business owner. I know it is challenging, as you know, as I found as well. So again, thank you very much for your time, and wish you much success in the future.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki, for sharing your story and giving us your perspective about the trends and findings as a small business owner. Thank you, Corinne, for helping me take us through the annual Women-Owned Business Study. And thank you to all who have participated and joined us today.
At Biz2Credit, we are committed to providing financing to more small businesses and helping owners secure the best funding options. With technology that makes business financing easy to understand and easy to access, Biz2Credit is helping tens of thousands of small businesses every year to increase cash flows and succeed. Apply online in minutes. You'll be able to create an account on biz2credit.com or by contacting us at our hotline visible on the Biz2Credit website, where you can submit your application today. If you have questions not addressed in today's session, please post them in the Q&A section as we conclude today's webcast. We will be leaving the stream running for an additional minute or two, just in case people want to enter those questions here. A member of the Biz2Credit funding team will review your questions and may reach out to you one-on-one to provide assistance or connect you to further resources. You can also locate resources mentioned in today's program on biz2credit.com, especially in the Knowledge Center section of the website, where the most recent Women-Owned Businesses study was released earlier this month. We will provide a few more minutes for anyone who wanted to enter those questions, and then the stream will disconnect. Thank you once again for joining us. The session will now conclude. A recording of today's webcast will be made available in the Biz2Credit Webcast Center. Your session will now disconnect automatically. Thank you.